Today, we're taking a deep dive into the year that has been anything but ordinary for rural Alberta. Over the past 12 months, rural municipalities of Alberta have found themselves at the crossroads, balancing real challenges with emerging opportunities. Now, it has been a year marked by sweeping legislative changes, growing financial pressures, and a renewed spotlight on the essential role rural communities play in the province's economic and social fabric. From the passage of Bill 50, which reshaped municipal governance and swept away long standing code of conducts, to the sobering reality of more than $250 million in unpaid oil and gas property taxes, rural municipalities have been navigating a landscape where stability can feel increasingly uncertain. Add to that a rural infrastructure deficit now measured in the tens of billions of dollars, and you begin to see the scale of what local leaders are confronting. Aging roads and bridges, stretched operating budgets, and the constant pressure to do more with less. Now, at the same time, these communities continue to demonstrate resilience. New provincial funding streams, targeted infrastructure investments, and collaborative work on tax accountability show that momentum is building in some areas of advocacy. And rural Alberta remains at the heart of agriculture, energy, and, yes, transportation. Sectors that not only drive the provincial economy, but define Alberta's identity. Yet the year wasn't only about policy and financing. Extreme drought conditions forced some municipalities to declare agricultural disasters, reminding us how vulnerable rural economies are to the shifting climate, and how urgently governments must respond to it. So today, we ask, where does rural Alberta go from here? How do municipalities strengthen governance, secure stable funding, and ensure their communities continue to thrive? And what opportunities lie ahead in 2026 and beyond? To help us untangle these questions, we are joined by someone who has been at the center of these conversations, Cara Westerland, President of the Rural Municipalities of Alberta. So without further ado, let's join Municipal Affairs after this message. In the heart of every thriving community lies a well-crafted strategic plan. But crafting such a plan requires expertise, experience, and a deep understanding of local needs. Enter Strategic Steps, your partner in municipal strategic planning. Strategic Steps' team of experts have years of experience in municipal administration. At Strategic Steps, they just don't develop plans. They co-create homegrown strategies tailored to your unique community. They listen, they collaborate, they empower your community to thrive. Contact Strategic Steps today and take the first step towards a brighter future for your municipality. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started. President, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about the year that was 2025 and, of course, the upcoming year of 2026. Looking back on the last year in 2025, what would you say was RMA's biggest advocacy win in the year?
Well, it has definitely been an interesting year for 2025. I think we're happy to see it closing. It was incredibly busy just with the priorities of the government, and of course, Chris, with the municipal election and the changes that it's brought upon us. So, on the advocacy side, we did get some wins here and there, not as many as we would like, but that just means our work continues, and I continue to have a job. But I think for us, a big win was the PTAS group, the Property Tax Assessment Strategy group that we were able to get together, not only with Municipal Affairs Ministry, but to get energy and minerals to the table too as well, to start hammering out what we are going to do with the recommendations and a plan moving forward, because this unpaid oil and gas tax issue is just not going away, and enough is enough.
So let's talk about that because that is the biggest story that I hear over and over again when I talk to Reeves, particularly at this time when they're going through their budget cycles. Because when it comes to unpaid oil and gas property taxes, this affects the bottom dollar of municipalities, particularly in rural Alberta. Now, earlier this year in January, rural municipalities of Alberta released a statement. I think it was actually a little bit later in March, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. But in that report, you said rural municipalities are collectively owed more than $253 million in unpaid oil and gas property taxes. Literally, the day we are recording this, one of your members, the Big Lakes County, just announced that they had to basically wash away $9 million of unpaid oil and gas property taxes because one company went bankrupt and they were unable to collect 9 million of the 11 million that was owed to them. How is this affecting local budgets and service delivery? And is this going to end with the group that was just launched this year?
That's an incredible number, and people hear it, and I think people are like, oh, it's $9 million, but when you look into what municipalities do, we are the government that's closest to the people, and our main focus is infrastructure in our communities, and that infrastructure is so key and integral to what industry, not only the oil and gas, but agriculture, forestry, what they do. So when you take a hit like that, you dig into Big Lakes' budget and you're going to see, obviously, there's going to be service cuts, there's going to be reductions in, infrastructure projects being either delayed or canceled altogether. And it has a direct impact on the residents and the people that live in that area. And, it actually has a direct impact on all Albertans because if the municipality was unable to collect that money, you and I both know there's an education portion of that the municipalities still have to pay and put forward. And yes, I know there's the PERK program and the grant out there to cover that. After so many years, we can apply to get that money back. But again, you're still out the money. And that grant comes from somewhere. And again, it comes from yours and my pocket. So it is something that affects every single Albertan, whether you live in rural Alberta or in a city or a town. It affects all of us, and it does have direct impact onto what that municipality is able to provide for residents in the community. I just go right back down to the basics. You're going to be looking at service cuts to how many times you see the grader down the road. Whether that culvert is replaceable, or you're just going to have to rip that bridge out, and residents are going to have to add an extra half hour to their drive to get around an infrastructure that just cannot be fixed because the money is not there. And I want to emphasize, industry uses the infrastructure too as well. So it's not just taking from Peter to pay Paul. This has an effect on every single person, and it's huge. So moving forward, PTAS, we're hoping to have our recommendations out mid-January, and really looking forward to what that's going to mean, and to try and move this forward. The other piece to this too is, I know it's a big number, talk about Big Lakes. We're going to see a few other municipalities come forward with write-offs too as well. I'm also at the same time, I'm not surprised. We knew this was coming. When we announced those numbers and we have that conversation, some of the GOA is like, well, how do you think we're going to collect that kind of money? I think the back of all of our minds, Chris, to be honest with you, we all know it's uncollectible. We know we're not going to see it, but we need it to stop. If we continue to let these companies operate, because you and I both know that number includes companies that continue to operate today. It includes, number of companies that are on the cusp of going bankrupt or insolvent. They're continuing to put a burden on the infrastructure and the community that they're working in. And it has to stop because we just can't keep doing what we're doing.
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Now, I'm not saying that RMA is insane, but I am saying that it must feel like you're going around in circles on this because there's two things I can rely on every single year. RMA releasing a list of how much they are owed in unpaid oil and gas taxes, and RMA advocating for the province to do something. Now, this year we saw some movement. And I say some movement with this province and RMA creating a working group to tackle this issue. What needs to be done? Because a working group is great, but actual solutions is better. What is the solution that this working group needs to do in 2026 so that way in 2027 you and I do not continue to have the same conversation?
Well, there's a few things in there, and I'm gonna sound like the broken record. Again, we are already preparing. I have a board meeting coming up, and we are going to be approving the RFD more than likely. I say approving. I'm fairly certain we will be approving it. We're going to put the call out back to members. It tends to be our January, February call to get the 2025 numbers in. I am not expecting much to change. I'm actually expecting it to grow. Or stay the same. We may see it. It's going to be interesting to see what the numbers say, because if we've got municipalities writing off, that may affect some of the numbers going forward. But that group, our biggest challenge is going to be once those recommendations are put out, it's following up on them, making sure that they're followed through on. And I think the other part, it's really important to also know some of the challenges we're facing with this too as well. Um, Municipalities tend to be kind of third, fourth on the list not to be paid. We know there's other indicators that these companies are not doing well, or they're going to become insolvent or bankrupt, or they're just being bad actors and just not paying. And that generally, again, because we're so close to the people, we're the government closest to the people, we know that they're not paying vendors, they're not paying our subcontractors in our community. And then the second tends to be the landowners not getting their surface rights or their surface payments. And then, then comes along the municipality. And then we know who has the hammer. The province has got the hammer. Once the companies stop paying the royalties, that's where they step in and say, or act all surprised that all of a sudden they're not getting paid their royalties. But there's been all these indicators leading up to this moment. Yeah, it's going to be challenging. I am not going to lie. I think we've got our work cut out with us, even with the recommendations coming out. You and I both know, certain aspects of the industry are going to push back on it, obviously, because they've been taking advantage of this for so long. And it's making sure that, municipal affairs, the department, energy and minerals is talking, and the AER, that we're all talking together to make sure that we're steering the ship in the right direction. And you and I both know that's going to be incredibly challenging in the years to come, to make sure that we're working towards a common goal to finally solve this issue once and for all. And I cannot believe, after being on this board for 8 years, elected official for 15 years, we're still battling this battle. Like, enough is enough.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And the one thing I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask it on the record so that way I can follow up with you. And that way the people at RMA who are listening to this at a later date might be able to give me this answer as well. I would love to hear from RMA how much has been written off this year, because I think that is the number that I think more and more people need to be aware of. $259 million of not failure to pay oil and gas property taxes is great, but how much of the municipalities are writing off this? So that is my only ask for 2026. That is my one request to you, President. So I want to talk about another challenge that I've seen creep up in 2025, and that is around rural infrastructure. Now, RMA has pegged, the latest analysis pegs rural infrastructure deficit at over $17 billion. And this goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about. What are the most urgent rural municipal infrastructure challenges that rural municipalities are facing in 2025? And do you see hope in 2026?
Well, it's so exciting that you're asking that question, because I do have permission to share. As we kick off 2026, we're going to be releasing the Closing the Gap campaign, which is going to be focusing on how the government, RMA, and municipalities can work together. And you're going to hear this common theme with me as president. It's about working together to solve these issues, because no one entity is ever going to solve it. But we're going to be sitting down at the table, trying to work through what the municipal infrastructure deficit looks like through strategic funding, proper data collection, and other means, to make sure that we've got a handle on what's happening and moving forward, how we're going to address this issue. For us, the infrastructure is, it is a broad term. It's a big term. We're talking everything from water treatment facilities, wastewater treatment. We're talking roads. We're talking bridges. We're talking culverts. Again, your listeners are probably sick of me talking about unpaid oil and gas taxes. They're also sick of me talking about culverts and bridges. But it is so important and so key to what we do. our members represent 85% of this province's landmass. Like that's incredible when you think that less than 15% of the population lives here. Why would somebody in downtown Edmonton care that I have a bridge or that I have to add 30 minutes to my commute because I've got a bridge taken out or a culvert taken out? Um, what you should care about is that also hamstrings industry, forest, agriculture, um, oil and gas. So, the ones who heat your homes, the ones who put food on your table, the ones that give you the building materials for you to go about your day-to-day lives, it directly impacts those industries and those people that eat and breathe that environment, so that you can live a certain way and have things that we take for granted every day. So it is going to be a huge focus on us for our municipal or for our organization in 2026 is about again, raising the issue, talking about what we can do, and formulating a plan moving forward. And the other thing I would be amiss talking about, and I know we're talking provincial, but there's a federal aspect to this too as well. And there's a piece in here where the federal government can step in. And I know there's been a lot of changing with the funding, even coming from the federal government. Obviously, still waiting for the budget approval, and really hoping that when we have those conversations with our MPs and our federal counterparts, that they're aware of the issue too. Unfortunately, sometimes when I sit at tables, the conversation is dominated about public transit, or recreation facilities. But the last time I checked, and I say this with all due respect, and trust me, I'm a person that uses these type of facilities too. But I'm sorry, but the swimming pool doesn't pay the bills at the end of the day, and it doesn't put food on the table, and it doesn't keep your home, your house warm. It's we've got to focus on the basic core needs of municipalities. And then once you've got that built in place or a solid plan on how you're going to address it, then we can expand and look at, I always say this, and, I know you're going to have viewers that disagree with me on this, but, a pool and an arena is it's a nice to have. It's not something that's going to make or break, a community. Other people are going to disagree with me, but, we have to really, really focus. We talk about housing, we talk about, the influx of population. We have to put them somewhere, but you also have to have the pipes in the ground to be able to accommodate it. And that's what we're going to really focus on. And you and I both know too, when the province and the federal government step out to the plate and we partner together, amazing things do happen in our communities, and we can get the projects done, and we can actually generally save a lot of money if the municipality is in charge of the project. And so that's what we're going to be really encouraging. But I'm super excited to be launching Closing the Gap campaign. And hopefully when we have this chat this time next year, we've got some really great stories and some really big wins to share with your viewers.
So talking about closing the gap, and this is a great segue into this type of conversation. Recent, and I say recent as in the last 12 months, provincial funding announcements around investments through STIP, through AMWWP, through Water for Life were helpful. And they are helping to close that quote unquote gap that we talk about. But there's far more that needs to be done. What would, and I know this is kind of because you're announcing it, so I'm going to play in the sandbox for 2 minutes, if you don't mind. What would a truly sustainable funding model look like for rural Alberta?
Well, and I think that's kind of the work that we need to work on moving forward is sitting down and collecting that proper data to understand what's going to work in my community is not going to work up in Mackenzie County. We know that. And it's making sure that when we formulate the recommendations and we deal with the budgetary decisions that need to be made, that rural lens is truly looked through. But at the same time, we have to understand that the funding needs to be flexible too at the same time. And it's about, what works in my community isn't going to work, in Pincher Creek, in the county of MD of Pincher Creek. And it's making sure that, I could sit here and tell you I could ask for $1 billion and tell you we could get $1 billion worth of projects done next year. I know you and I know
I thought
that's
you would have said
impossible,
seven. I thought you would have said 17 billion just to offset all the infrastructure deficit that we talked about. But I want to talk about something that you just mentioned briefly in the last answer, and that is around housing. Now, we are seeing a game of chess being played in the province of Alberta right now, where we are seeing the pieces move around. People from urban centers are moving into rural Alberta. People from rural are moving into urban because of aging in place and they want to downsize. But we are seeing a lot of movement when it comes to sort of the internal migration from urban to rural and even rural for urban, or even Saskatchewan, BC coming into our communities. And with that, that puts a lot of pressure on our housing supply and our housing demands. More and more municipalities in 2025, I believe, have been stepping up to the plate to address the housing challenges. Now, I'm going to get in trouble when I say this, but I'm going to say it as respectfully as I possibly can. Municipalities do not build houses. Yes, they
I
do
agree.
work with housing, they work with housing co ops, but they are not out there building the housing that people live in. That is the private industry. But what you do
Agree.
is build the pipes that are in the ground. With this demand that we are seeing in our population, with the challenges around housing that we are facing right now, are municipalities at a reaching point right now where they might have to limit or restrict development because the infrastructure simply can't keep up with the demand that we're putting on it because of the housing supply needs?
And I think that the answer to that, it's going to vary across the province. It's going to depend on where each municipality is at, how well they've been maintaining infrastructure. It's a great point because I just came through the municipal election too as well, and I was door knocking. I was shocked. I'm from Brazeau County, and this is my fifth time going around and door knocking. And we're aware of it because I see the development permits go out. But when I actually, showed up at somebody's door to knock on their door, the amount of change I've seen, even in just in my little small piece of the world, um, amount of new residents I had seen, and you know what, Chris, the amount of residents I've seen from BC and Ontario that moved here because it was quote unquote affordable. They could actually buy, 10 acres with a house. Their taxes, their property taxes were reasonable. Um, but then again, in the same breath, I was also dealing with complaints like, well, it's dusty and, I don't see a grader. And I'm like, well, it's a direct correlation to what you pay in property taxes. And by the way, you now no longer live in an urban setting, you live in a rural area. There's going to be, industrial noises, whether it's agriculture or forestry or whether it's oil and gas. So again, it's about, I always tell people it's about having reasonable expectations at the same time. And, it's great to see people moving out into the country, but they also have to realize that they're not living in an urban setting. They're not going to have pavement. They don't have street lighting. They're not going to have, I cannot believe in 15 years, I've had to deal with garbage pickup. I'm like, it's just, I've lived here, over 30 years and it's just, you just always have to take your garbage to the transfer station, right? So it's going to be about, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, not only
Are
this
your
year, but
members up
leading
for
up
it
and even.
though?
Oh, absolutely. I think 100%. I think we're always up to have a frank conversation about what the needs and the wants are in each of our communities, and it's about having that autonomy and deciding, what, it's going to be great. Some portions of Parkland County, which I neighbor, have garbage pickup, but it's just not going to ever be feasible in my municipality. Or if it's something you want, by the way, we're going to double your property taxes because that's how we pay for it. Nothing. You and I both know nothing is free in this life.
And if it
But I think
is,
we're
show
definitely,
me what it is.
yeah, yeah. I think we're excited. I think the opportunities to have conversations, and I know I'm picking on some pretty basic things, but I think the doors are always open with elected officials, especially at the municipal level. We live in these communities too. We're raising our families. We do business. Our kids go to school. We get it as well. And it's about I'm excited about having those conversations because the best solutions come when we're all sitting together, having those conversations. That it's not the same two or three people making a decision. That you're truly having those conversations as a community. And you know what, Chris, we're going to have some difficult conversations. In the next year, the next 3 years, well, I guess 4 years leading up to the next election, there is really hard. issues coming down the pipeline. I'm going to, the infrastructure deficit, the downloading of policing cost on municipalities, and what that's going to look like. Bill 50 and the changes there. I mean, code of conduct. We haven't even talked about, a number of those topics that are still, yes, they were kind of dealt with in 2025, but you and I both know they're not quite done yet. And they're going to definitely surface again in 2026. So.
So you brought it up, so let's play in that sandbox. Bill 50 was the biggest legislative piece that came out this year, and it changes the way that we operate municipal elections, but it also removed code of conducts because at the then Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver, said he was seeing and hearing from people that it was being weaponized for personal gain and for political gain. Now, I don't know because I didn't have the chance to be at the RMA convention, but did you hear any municipal leader at the fall RMA convention around these changes and what it means for that decorum that we want to strive for when it comes to that work that has to be happening around that council table?
Yeah, the conversations were interesting. Some of us seasoned elected officials, I was going to say older ones, but then I'll date myself, but I'll go with seasoned elected officials. We don't have rose-colored glasses on at this moment. A lot of people, we were still kind of coming off that high of the election. So the conversation around it was, comments I would hear like, I get why we don't need them. Like, I don't understand. It's been a great month so far. Things have been, phenomenal. But you and I both know after 4 years, that's not going to be so true. And you know what? To be honest with you, we were already seeing issues starting to bubble up to the surface, even within, some municipalities' first, second council meetings. You've seen some significant issues already coming to the forefront. I am going to be optimistic. I do know that the Municipal Affairs Department is working on putting something out. We should see it in the spring. That is what they've indicated to us. So there is something coming. Not having anything at all in place isn't working, but what we had before wasn't working. And I think they've heard that loud and clear. Time will tell. I've been asking anytime I see the minister or, key staff, I've been asking, give me a little bit of detail. I want to know, you and I both know the devil is in the detail. I want to know what it's going to look like. And I sure hope we come with some common ground on this. You and I both know having the CAOs investigate council was, not the best. Happy to see, obviously, with it all being gone, that part's going. And I think the conversations I've had with the minister have been really promising on some of those, really big issues, making sure that they're going to be addressed coming forward in the spring. So I guess you and I will just have to wait. I will continue to push and see if I can get any little nuggets or any indications of what's coming. But I've just so far been told to expect something in the spring of 2026, and we all should be fairly happy, I think was the word that got used, with what's being proposed. But yeah, and I
One of
think, oh,
I was going to say one of the big other things that changed this year, and I want to get your reaction because it doesn't impact rural municipalities, but it could have. This election cycle is the first election cycle where we saw partisan politics enter into the municipal arena. And that was in the two biggest cities of Calgary and Edmonton. Now, in the spring of 2025 at your RMA convention, I was there and I spoke to some of your members, and there was a lot of concern that what is going on in the city of Edmonton and Calgary is going to be transposed into rural communities after the election. Now, Minister Williams has announced, or did say in a newspaper article that I read, that there is no intention to move forward with that. Are you sighing a little bit of relief that partisan politics isn't going to be introduced into rural municipalities' elections in the next year?
I don't know about sighing relief. I'm still very skeptical of it because as long as it exists in the big cities, that potential of it existing elsewhere is very much real and there. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the two bigger cities do with it. You and I both know we've already had, elected officials already recant what quote unquote political party they represented. So they basically got elected under this political platform. And then I think the minute, like within a week or two of being elected, they're like, oh, by the way, now I'm no longer with the party and I'm going to be independent. They should have expected some of those games to happen. But again, I'm not going to hold my breath on this one. I'm actually going to still continue to be a little bit skeptical. You and I both know a lot can happen in 4 years. And as long as there's enabling legislation or it's existing in one spot, the likelihood of it popping up or the potential of it is still a very, very, very real threat. And it's something that we're going to keep our eye on because you and I both know, even just talking with our members, I'd be really hard to find a handful of people, even enough people to count on one hand that would have that supported this.
I want to be the reason I asked that question because it leads into the last question before I start talking about the future. And it's an important one because over the last year, when I speak to municipal leaders who are in rural Alberta, I get a sense that there's frustration between rural Alberta and Edmonton right now with the provincial government because they're seeing that the provincial government is labeling all municipalities the same, and they're labeling the issues of urban municipalities with rural municipalities. And when I talk to rural leaders, it's no, we are different and we are separate, and we do have some of the issues, but we do not have the challenges that they have in
Mhm.
2025 with that collaborative approach that RMA has taken with the federal government and even the provincial government. Are you seeing a turning of sort of how the province views rural municipalities and viewing it as a separate entity and rather than lumping it in with everyone is the same?
I we are seeing some movement. A lot of it still has to do with educating our MLAs and our ministers about what actual municipalities, whether we're even rural or urban, what we actually do, the services we provide. You and I both know this is probably the last kind of quote unquote rural UCP or rural government that we're going to see just with the changes coming. But the other piece to that too is I've seen a steady decline in elected officials on both the provincial and the federal side that have municipal backgrounds. So we're lacking that, that basic understanding of what municipalities do. And then when you deal with the federal level, municipalities and other and provinces do things much differently than we do. So it's again having that education piece. But we are making some headway there. But you and I both know we're going to be going into a provincial election while we're in this municipal term. And I think that's so key and so important that our members and our elected officials in rural Alberta are talking with their MLAs regularly, keeping them up to date, reminding them about what we do. You've heard me before in the media say, sometimes I feel like the provinces must be short on problems because they want to take over ours. So I kind of use that analogy. I continue to do that. And you brought up a really good, interesting and a good point too about rural and urban. I have no issues, and in our association works well with AB Munis when we have similar or the same issue. We work together quite well on pushing that. But you and I both know we are very distinct and different in a lot of ways. And when we have to advocate on pieces that specifically are rural, we do that. And the same thing, we don't always agree with what's happening on the urban side. We can talk a little bit about the ICFs maybe at a later date because we also know there's changes that are happening there. And that's going to be an interesting one too in 2026 is the ICF. The frameworks and what they're going to look like because you're going to start seeing municipalities have to renegotiate. So you're going to quite quickly see, I think, some lines in the sand be drawn. But I
Are you hopeful?
I would be amiss. I am hopeful, but it's you and I both know, standing alone on a hill, we're never going to get anywhere. We are going to have to work together on some of these big issues. Because if we don't, we're just going to be another. It's going to go into an echo chamber, and we're just going to be kind of the lone man standing there. So we're very cautious. When we push an issue, we know it's a real issue. We're not coming. We're not screaming that the sky is falling every other day. When we come forward and we've got pressing issues, they're very concerning. They're backed with data. They're backed with facts and information, and they are about keeping our communities moving forward. I think at the end of the day, there's no personal gain in any of this for any of us. We are truly here working on issues to make sure that our communities are strong, not only today but moving into into the future.
Two last questions, and this is the big one because I think this is the biggest thing that happened when it comes to rural Alberta in 2025. And that is the federal government of the province of Alberta signed an MOU around oil and gas. Now, oil and gas is the bread and butter, and it is the great thing that is what makes Alberta Alberta. We have agriculture, but oil and gas is the fabric of our kind of our identity. What does this mean, this MOU mean for rural municipalities across Alberta? And is this a good first step in getting our resources that we have come to rely on to markets outside of America?
This is a huge opportunity, I think, for the province, for rural Alberta, and for everyone that lives here to see some movement on this. You and I both know oil and gas is such a key, integral part of who we are as a province. We know it pays a lot of bills at the end of the day. So I'm very, very optimistic about what this is going to mean and moving forward. Very happy to help in any way that we can, both with the provincial government and the federal government, with any of the, you and I know there's a lot of moving pieces underneath the surface on this one, and we're really keen on being at the table to see this move forward. I think this is probably the best news in well over a decade for our province. But again, you have to remember we were also, I think, so far at the bottom of the barrel. There's only one way out of this, and it was up. So we will, I am optimistic, but still a little cautious. The devil's in the detail. But I think this is an incredible opportunity for Alberta and for our country as a whole.
Despite the challenges that persisted over 2025, and there was some great opportunities and some great accomplishments that your members had in 2025, rural Alberta has enormous strengths, whether it be the land, the talent, the industry, and even the communities that make up rural Alberta. Looking at 2026 for my final question, where do you see as the biggest opportunity for growth or innovation in the coming year?
We have so many avenues that we can move in. We've talked about oil and gas, we've talked about forestry, we've talked about agriculture, but there's work being done on data centers and AI centers. The other piece to that too is the conversation around nuclear. I know it is still a little bit decisive, but there is some huge opportunities for rural Alberta and for our communities to move forward. I am so excited to get to work and to continue working on these avenues. Alberta has always been, I think, a world leader in innovation and industry, and we will continue to do that. And rural Alberta plays a huge part in that. And I think those opportunities are going to be endless moving into the future.
Well, President, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for making this a great conversation, but also just want to take a moment and thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending the last 12 months willing to take my questions and talk about the challenges and the work that rural municipal leaders are doing across this great province. I look forward to continued conversations in 2026, and we'll see you in Edmonton this spring for the spring convention of RMA. So looking forward to that, and have yourself a happy Christmas and New Year.
You too, and thank you so much for all that you do and for allowing us to tell our story. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. Now, we hope you've enjoyed today's conversation and gained some valuable insights into the worlds of rural politics in the province of Alberta. Now, your support means the world to us, so if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching this or wherever you're listening to this today. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we will be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs shortly. Till then, everyone.